Good evening and thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Nick Blumberg. 2 words, da Pope.
La pace sia con tutti voi.
Catholics celebrate the new Holy Father, and locals rejoice over a Chicago-born, Dalton-raised Sox fan leading the church with heartfelt celebrations and enough memes to fill St. Peter's Square.
This governor has bragged about Illinois being a firewall against President Trump's immigration enforcement agenda.
The Trump administration tries to turn up the heat on Governor Pritzker by sending DHS Secretary Kristi Noem to Springfield. Meantime, Pritzker agrees to testify at a congressional hearing on immigration next month.
Building the safest, most affordable big city in America is what we have set out to do, and we're finally beginning to experience that.
Mayor Johnson celebrates as the city council signs off on a landmark affordable housing effort, but runs into a wall of pushback over reported moves to install leaders at the CTA and CPS. Organizers cancel a Latin music fest over visa concerns for performers, and usually vibrant Cinco de Mayo celebrations are muted over fears of Trump's immigration crackdown. And 2 more well-known names throw their hats in the ring to replace retiring Senator Dick Durbin, Congressmembers Raja Krishnamurthy and Robin Kelly. And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Brandon Pope from WCIU, Katrina Pham from Borderless Magazine, Alice Yin from the Chicago Tribune, and Justin Lawrence from Crane's Chicago Business. Let's get right to it. Words I never thought I'd say. The Pope is from Chicago land. As expected, everybody was extremely cool and normal about it online. Brandon, what stood out to you in the reaction to Pope Leo XIV?
I think what stood out to me is just Chicagoans have so much pride, you know, and it's fully on display in moments like this. Whether you're Catholic or not, it's a moment of unison for the city. The South Side debating whether he's a Sox fan or a Cubs fan, the memes that came of it with Malort and Italian beef. Just a great moment for the city, but also when you look at his overall values, I think that's a moment for this country as well. You look through his alleged old Twitter account, he had disagreements on immigration policy, which is something we're dealing with here in Illinois and throughout the entire country. Disagreements on the handling from J.D. Vance and his interpretation of Catholicism. So that's going to be something to watch in the future. But the fun part of this was just seeing how the city came together overall to kind of celebrate this historic moment.
Yeah, I mean, you know, maybe it was because Francis was such a beloved figure. Maybe everybody really loved the movie Conclave, but it really did seem like
a good movie.
It's a great movie. I loved it. I mean, it seemed like people were particularly invested in and interested in this, Catholics and non-Catholics alike. I mean, Alice Yin, were you surprised by that kind of fervent attention to this process?
Maybe at first, but then I was like, that makes sense because, you know, it's Chicago. The fact that he is the first American Pope, but he is from Chicago, I think really adds another star on the city. After we have taken some battering in national reputation over the years, so I think it's nice for us to just stick it to New York, LA, and other cities.
There's a meme out there that said, God decided which one's better, Chicago or New York. I mean, he chose Chicago.
No longer the second city.
Alice, you said the American Pope, but I think it's just Chicago Pope, right?
Right.
Like we've decided he's from Chicago, not America.
Coming this fall from NBC, Chicago Pope.
Even though I was the Chicago Pope for a long time. I'll go ahead and give up the title.
Yeah, I think this guy might have you beat on
I think
that.
so. I think so.
Well, you know, Katrina, to Brandon's point about, you know, what we know of his values so far, that he seems likely to continue Francis's tradition of concern for people on the margins, outreach to different faiths, you know, his potential former, you know, social media, you know, expressions of belief. After the celebrations died down, do you think we might see some conflict there with American political figures over the Pope's views?
I mean, the Pope has really come out, or in the past, and supported, you know, posts on Twitter, now X, about disagreements with the Trump and the Vance administration over their policies with migrants, and so we'll have to see whether he chooses to take a stance and whether that's one of the reasons, right, why the conclave chose an American Pope to really push back on the impact that the Trump's administration has had on migrants and refugees here in Chicago, especially since the Catholic Church is one of the main forces in refugee resettlement here in Chicago and nationwide.
Yeah, and especially, you know, not only an American Pope, but someone with Peruvian citizenship who spent a lot of time living and working there. You know, as we've all been talking about, the memes, the online attention went, you know, absolutely wild. Justin Lawrence, do you think that's going to die down anytime soon, or is the spotlight going to continue to shine pretty bright on the new
What
pope?
do you mean by soon? You know, like through the end of the month? No, or maybe not. No, people are. I saw the first thing I saw yesterday after I saw the news is someone saying Chicago is going to be so annoying about this, and we turned out and we were and we were proud of it. No, it was a very fun day on it was like an old school day on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
It was a very fun, memeable day yesterday.
Yeah.
In
I mean,
Chicago.
Obama, Oprah, Michael Jordan, now we have a pope. I think that's a pretty incredible four horsemen in a sense here. Pretty awesome. But kind of to your point here, I'm really fascinated to see what role he takes in terms of, like, is he going to be a more outspoken pope? We saw with Pope Francis, he was a little more outspoken than his predecessor and kind of shook the system a little bit. How far does Pope Leo take things? Does he go any further, or does he kind of step back? I think that's going to be interesting to watch going forward.
Yeah, it seems like he's known as a little quieter, a little more of a deliberative figure. So it'll be interesting to see what becomes of his papacy, and a relatively young pope at 69. So a lot of years ahead.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the people celebrating a local pope was Chicago's #1 cheerleader, Mayor Brandon Johnson. Also celebrated a big win on affordable housing. Alice, what did the city council approve this week?
Yeah, so this week, after much deliberation, they finally approved his Affordable Housing Revolving Loan Fund, which sets up a nonprofit developer that gives low interest loans to developers who want to build affordable housing units in the city. So that's a major piece of his affordable housing plank, and one that he could really use after a much stalling in his progressive agenda over the months, and coming right on time for his 2-year anniversary in office.
Yeah, and this was something, Justin, that there was a lot of behind-the-scenes negotiations. It took a lot to get this across the finish line.
Yeah, and I think it was deliberate to try to get it across the finish line for his 2-year anniversary. It was 5 weeks ago, maybe, is when the first consternation started coming up, and I don't know the exact wordage, but what was originally introduced versus what was approved was they added a lot of language to appease aldermen over kind of ethics concerns, over concerns that maybe labor wouldn't be involved like they usually are in Chicago housing developments. So I think the final vote was 30 to 18.
30
right?
to 18,
so in Chicago politics these days, 30 is wow. That's a landslide almost. So it'll be interesting to see, to Alice's point, if this is kind of just a mirage, a one-off victory when everything else has been so stalled and kind of troublesome waters for Johnson lately.
He even had aldermen who usually disagree with him actually come out and say, well, it is a good idea.
Yeah.
How it's put together and in place, we can work on that, but a good idea. So maybe some signs of progress for city council relations. I don't know. We're going to have to see on that one.
Hope so,
I hope so, but the impact of this this policy overall, I mean, it seems kind of minimal, 40 affordable housing units a year maybe. However, anything you would think would be good, because this city faces a major cliff when it comes to affordable housing, and you have more than 50% of people that live in this city spending more than 30% of their income on housing and utilities. So everyone needs some relief, right? And so the more affordable housing, the better. Where it goes is what I'm looking for. Is it going to be more concentrated in Black and brown communities or somewhere else? That's important too.
That became one of the kind of touching points. Alderman Pat Dow, who's the finance committee chair and an ally of Johnson, voted against this over her concern. At least she's right. In the short term, this works best in more affluent neighborhoods where the high rents, high market rate rents can subsidize the affordable rents, and that is the plan in the near future. And she says, hey, it's not going into well, she represents the South Loop and then further down south, so it might go into the South Loop, but not the rest of my ward, is what she said. And in the near term, that's right. I think some housing activists and others push back that, hey, if we're using this money in these neighborhoods in this way, it frees up other housing programs and funds that we use to use elsewhere across the city.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to think about how the city can start funding things with city money instead of thinking about all of these federal grants, because with the Trump administration and Chicago and Illinois are kind of like pushing back and forth with the Trump administration about all of these different federal grants. And so this is potentially an opportunity, right, to use money from the city, from local taxpayers to fund local initiatives.
And if it works right, it's 135 million now, and it will grow.
Yeah,
it'll only get bigger.
Well, and I mean, to that point about alder people that usually disagree with Johnson, to that pretty comfortable margin, Alice, do you think this might be something where we're seeing a thaw, an improvement in relations between the mayor and members of city council? Perhaps the mayor's team becoming more adept at negotiating some of these legislative issues?
I think time will tell. During the past 2 years, we've seen an unprecedented, in modern history at least, amount of close votes and tiebreakers. And even with this piece of legislation, there were a lot of kinks behind the scenes, including almost like last-minute delaying of committee vote because of AFSCME, the union, having concerns. So I think there still is a long road to go with learning about the basics of IGA and working with aldermen, but it seems like 3018 is certainly nothing to downplay.
The tone is right that they're striking, though. I don't know if you guys saw the article from Mariah Woelfel from the Sun-Times talking with Johnson, and he was taking accountability and saying, hey, we've made some mistakes, including with that relationship with the city council and how we treat those situations. I think the first step is acknowledging there's a problem, right? From there, what you do about it, we got to see, but that's some progress from what we've seen in the past, which is deflect and act like everything's fine. So I'm very keen to see how this moves forward with others. Do we see any of his even allies who have kind of stepped away a little bit come back to the fold too?
Yeah, and we've seen mayors in the past wait until campaign season to take that accountability,
right.
So it might make sense to get out in front of it. Speaking of pushback from city council, 30 alder people are calling on the school board to keep in place a requirement that the CPS leader has a superintendent's license. This comes on the heels of reports that the mayor is considering his chief of staff to be the interim CPS CEO. Katrina, if you're a newly elected school board member, not to mention a CPS student or family member, how frustrating is all the political back and forth over district leadership this year?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly frustrating because these are the people who are running your schools and who have direct impact on your livelihood and things that are happening in your school. And to see this back and forth between the school board and then Johnson over like whether someone needs to have a license or not to be a part of the board, and everything that happened with CPS CEO Pedro Martinez, like it's just very wishy-washy for these students who are currently in school, like having their school year, and for them to not have it set up before the end of the school year and it's approaching, like it can be very confusing for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah. Another question about leadership, a potentially controversial appointment. Justin, you had a story this week about who the mayor is considering for the CTA's next president. What did we learn?
Yeah, the mayor has been working behind the scenes to install the city's chief operating officer, John Robertson. And John is he is a longtime Cook County city official. At one time he ran, for a brief time, ran the Department of Aviation. And I haven't heard a lot of opposition to him specifically, but what these transit advocates and one of the mayor's own appointees to the CTA board are saying is, look, we're at a very bad time for CTA. In Springfield, they're debating the future of regional transit. There's a $770 million combined fiscal cliff here. We need a national expert, someone who has real transit experience to come in, and thus far, Johnson is still hoping to put in Robertson. There was a strange CTA board meeting yesterday, a special meeting where they didn't really say much to the public. They went behind closed doors to discuss, I imagine, to discuss all of this and try to get on the same page. But, Johnson is not confirmed. He does not talk about personnel decisions, as he likes to say, that Robertson is his guy. But at this point, if it's not Robertson, then the mayor is backing away from it. That is the person he wants to install.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of being at that meeting, and it was half an hour of public comment of people saying, don't do this, and then an hour of closed doors. You have to wonder, too, at a time where, facing down a fiscal cliff, trying to, come back from this huge service deficit, the acting president, whether she gets the job or not, is someone with a long tenure there. It seems like it might be potentially, risky to try to install a new president before things are settled in Springfield. Yeah,
it's certainly the authority of the job could be changed in the next month or 2 months or 7 months if they don't get it done this session. But You know, I also think that maybe points to, even though there's calls for a national search, let's find an expert in the field, someone with long history. I don't know that someone from the outside might be hesitant to come here while there's so much uncertainty and you don't know the financial picture. And John Robertson is someone with you know, long ties here, experience. He might look at it a different way and say, hey, I've got the chops to navigate this kind of uncertainty.
I also think the mayor's circle of people he can trust is just getting smaller and smaller. He trusts Robertson, he trusts his chief of staff to lead these important agencies. And as he's just taken hits internally within the progressive movement, I think he is just very mindful of who is out to get him or who is actually behind him.
Yeah, and you know, a national search costs money. It takes time. It could be a difficult process. So.
Yeah, and I think the key thing here for Roberson is, can he lobby in Springfield? Can you actually get money, federal and state? That's crucial. That's probably the #1 qualification. I know advocates want someone that's rode CTA before, but let's get some money for CTA. That should be priority #1 at this point, right?
Yeah, and there are a lot of very complicated streams that have funding that have to come together to keep the CTA running. And
so important to the city too.
Oh yes, absolutely. Well, we saw DHS Secretary Kristi Noem visiting Springfield this week. Got some pushback from Democrats, from immigrant advocates over misinformation about migrants and crime. Pushback from the family of a woman allegedly killed by her partner, who's a Mexican national. Katrina, was there much substance to this visit, or was it sort of a poke in the eye to Governor Pritzker?
I think it's just the latest in the Trump administration's effort to really push back on sanctuary cities. I mean, they have the lawsuit against Chicago and Illinois for sanctuary policies. They have, threats to pull funding from the city and the state because of the sanctuary policies. And now that Noem's here, she was just here to kind of talk about sanctuary policies, but nothing else that DHS is also working on here, like the real IDs, for example. And that's something that that is a pain point for a lot of Chicagoans right now who are waiting in these hours-long lines for real IDs. And I think the Secretary of the State, Alexi Janulius, was saying that, like, why is Kristi Noem here to talk about sanctuary policies and not the things that are actually impacting us right now, which are these long lines at the real ID facility. So I think it was a lot of, like Pritzker said, just public PR about policies and trying to double down on their message that these policies are really harmful to community members.
Yes.
And what the parents of the woman who Kristi Noem was invoking had to say, they're saying, they're urging her, please don't do this, because our daughter doesn't even, espouse the same views and policies that you're spewing right now. That dynamic right there, and seeing a government that just willingly says, forget all that, we're just going to go forward anyway. We saw not a great reception there in Springfield for. I wonder how much of this is about targeting Pritzker.
I think 100%. I think we're going to see a lot more of this over the next year or two, because he's definitely mulling the bid, and that's going to make him public enemy #1 or 1, 2, 3, 4. There's so many governors and others in contention. But
and he's more than just a 2028 threat. With his money and resources, he's also a 2026 midterm.
And he's already been putting money into races.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Money, and he's not been shy about criticizing Trump on these specific policies. He's kind of trying to set himself up as lead attack dog, on cable
very different
news
than Governor
and
Whitmer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So.
Covering her face up with a piece of paper. Well,
what a photo.
I mean, speaking of Governor Pritzker, he's agreed to testify at this congressional hearing on states' immigration policies. I mean, Alice, what's the upside for him here? Is this defending Illinois? Is this burnishing his reputation? Is this both?
So I covered when Mayor Johnson went for the exact same committee hearing. And, a lot of it is pretty much political theater. They're not there to actually discover the solution to immigration policy in the U.S. A lot of it is a trap that could backfire on the Democratic governors and the mayors who showed up. But also, if you show up and perform well, I think that could be a good rebuttal to the Republicans. While also considering that Illinois is being sued for the sanctuary city policy.
I would add that, we all know Governor Pritzker here, obviously, but in poll after poll after poll at the national level, he does not fare among the top contenders for 2028 or previously for vice president or potentially a 2024 run. And so it gets him another chance to be on primetime TV. Well, for political dorks, it'll be primetime TV. I don't know that everybody else is watching these, right? But it gives them a chance to be in the spotlight.
Well, in this situation we're in politically, it's also an opportunity to make a moment for memes or anything that somebody can clip or to say, hey, you know, to capture a moment. So I'm sure that's part of the calculation for sure.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see if he can really get his message across in a different way than Johnson. Johnson really came across as if he was reading like from a script and really robotically. And you know, there were other mayors there who kind of went viral on social media, right, for their, you know, clippable moments that you're kind of talking about that are kind of supporting immigrants and migrants. And so I'll be really interested to see if Pritzker can have that same message come across.
There was an entire story this week. I think Bulwark, right, did a story on how he's so memeable and he's embracing it. So he will. I think he will come prepared. Sometimes we've seen him have somewhat dad jokes that don't always land. I was here a month ago. We were talking about one of those, but he will come prepared with those quips in hopes that one of them sticks.
Yeah, you know, the dad jokes, you know, come on, sometimes they can be good, sometimes they can be worthwhile.
They're high risk, right? Sometimes
right,
they're good,
yeah.
sometimes they're
He had one of the DNC
bad.
that didn't land at all.
Yeah. I guess if you're going for a first do no harm approach, you probably stay away from the wordplay. All right, well, sticking with politics for a minute, we've got 2 members of Illinois' congressional delegation jumping into the Senate race. Robin Kelly, Raj Krishnamurthy, also a member of the delegation stepping down, longtime Representative Jan Schakowsky. You know, Justin, how crowded are these races going to get?
They'll get pretty crowded. I mean, there's another Representative Lauren Underwood is somewhat expected to jump in. On the north side race, you know, there's 3 or 4 candidates. I think Everson Mayor Daniel Biss might be considered the favorite there, but I wouldn't be surprised if more jump in. And this is just, you know, ever since Senator Dick Durbin announced that he is not seeking another term, we are in political season in Illinois and Chicago for 4 years. So,
yeah. And this really is a changing of the guard for Illinois. I mean, you know, Dick Durbin and Jan Schakowsky, stalwarts of Illinois politics. I mean, it seems like the congressional delegation could have a bigger learning curve in the next couple of terms.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You know.
I'm curious what Underwood's going to do here, because the calculus, you would think, with black women being the backbone of the Democratic Party, if you split the vote too much, do you kind of do Stratton, Kelly, and Underwood hurt themselves altogether and just all 3 lose with that calculus? I'm very curious about what that dynamic's going to be like, and if Underwood just says, "Hey, I'm in a congressional district where this can go red as well. Do I stay and keep the seat, or do I offer that new generation of leadership?" She's like, what, 38 years old, and stick to that message. But yeah, we're seeing a changing of the guard, that this house of cards and dominoes falling. We're going to see a lot of names pop up that I'm sure maybe we don't even expect, just to see and test the waters. You never know who's going to catch fire. Schakowsky's seat with, what's her, Kat? I'm going to try to say the name.
Gazella.
Okay, there you go.
I think I got it.
Okay.
I spoke confidently. I don't know if I got it right.
You know, young, doesn't live in the district. I think she just moved there, right? What factor will she be versus some of the more establishment candidates who haven't emerged yet, but I'm sure there will be some.
Yeah, State Senator Laura Fine jumped into the race. I mentioned Biss's name. I don't think he's not in the race, but people assume that he will.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's a hotbed of politics up there on the north side.
It's going to be a lot
suburbs.
to watch. Well, we've got about 45 seconds left, but I want to get to organizers of that Latin music festival postponing, Cinco de Mayo parade canceled. Alice, do you think we'll see more of these cultural celebrations canceled or altered in some way because of concerns about the Trump administration's immigration policy?
Yeah, I think so. Right now, it's all in free fall, and while the courts have tried to push back at times, it's pretty much an unprecedented time for immigration enforcement, and I think these organizers are thinking better safe than sorry.
Yeah, you have to imagine that the safety of attendees is going to be a big question. All right, well, we had a lot to get to, and you were a great panel to talk about it with, but we are out of time. So our thanks to Brandon Pope, Katrina Pham, Alice Yin, and Justin Lawrence. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by
And that's our show for this Friday night. Now for the Week in Review, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay informed. Have a great weekend. All right, Katrina, you had a piece this week about Vietnamese Americans marking the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. What did you hear from them?
So I'm hearing, from people who actually lived through the war and who came here as refugees, who some were living in re-education camps in South Vietnam when Northern Vietnam took over the country. And, there's still a lot of pain for them, for people who lived through the war, but there's a lot of hope for the younger generation that are living here in Chicago now, their children, the second and third generation, and what they can build here and the success that they can have. So I think there's a mix of that pain, but also hope for the future.
Yeah, and I mean, folks have, set some really deep roots here.
Yeah, I mean, you walk down Argyle Street in Uptown, that's all Vietnamese businesses, and that's all from the fall of Saigon, that's all from after the Vietnam War. I mean, that was the biggest refugee resettlement effort in U.S. history, and so many people came here to Chicago.
Okay. Well, I've never thought about that before. It's really awesome.
Yeah, it's a huge community. Another congressional piece of testimony this week, DePaul's president talking about campus protests and anti-Semitism. Brandon, it seems like Republicans aren't necessarily letting up on, higher education. What do we think happens next?
Yeah, with these anti-Semitism concerns, you heard the DePaul president say, hey, I did make some mistakes. Ultimately, he didn't please either side on this. You have the pro-Palestinian groups on campus saying, you throw us under the bus.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports educational initiatives in the legal profession.